Welcome and thanks everybody for joining. We're thrilled to have you here. Today's webinar is titled Retail in Real Time, Powering Store Performance with Deeper Data. And in the webinar, I think we're going to explore a variety of topics that are all rooted in data. You're going to hear some fresh perspectives of solutions that are shaping the future of retail, and you'll get to see some of the impact that they're driving for retailers like Busy Beaver, who we have on the call today. But first, I'm going to cover a little bit of housekeeping. In terms of logistics, this session is being recorded, and we're going to share that recording with you afterwards. If you happen to experience any technical issues, I would try refreshing your browser or reconnecting. That typically solves most of those technical challenges. And in terms of participation, we encourage questions. Feel free to use the Q&A function throughout the session. We're going to try to save time at the end of the webinar to address as many questions as possible. And if you want to budget the time for today, I would say expect to be here about 40 or 45 minutes together today, depending on how the discussion goes. But without further ado, I'd say let's jump in. I'm excited to be joined by a couple of retail pros who know data inside and out. First, I'm excited to kick off the session by introducing you to Adam Gunnett, who's recently been promoted to the Vice President of Business Intelligence and Strategy at Busy Beaver. He was the winner of the 2025 Pittsburgh CIO of the Year Tech Trailblazer Award. It's a mouthful. With more than 20 years of experience in IT and a decade of leadership at Busy Beaver, Adam's been at the forefront of bringing innovation to retail, driving initiatives like autonomous inventory scanning robots, electronic shelf labels, and AI-driven analytics that bridge IT expertise with business strategy. Adam has his finger on the pulse of getting the right data and technology into the hands of frontline teams. And I had the chance to catch his session at Zipline's Summer Camp User Conference. Trust me, I would say you're in for a treat. Not only does Adam bring some great practical experience and energy to the conversation, but he also has a knack for weaving in plenty of beaver puns for us all to chew on. Adam, I'm hoping that you have a few ready for us today as well.
I'll have to get digging away at that. Didn't have too many prepared, but I'll see what I can, muster up here today.
Awesome. And then with that, I'll pass the time over to Greg to introduce himself.
Sure. My name is Greg. I spent most of my career actually doing various retail things in merchandising and planning before coming over to the technology side, partially out of wanting to get into the forefront of some of these new technologies, and partially because I was tired of having bad tools as a user.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. For myself, I lead product marketing here at Zipline, which really gives me a front row seat into some of the exciting ways that we're helping customers kind of surface and visualize data to help them make better decisions and really dial in the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. But I would say on a day-to-day basis, I'm also using my data myself to shape the decisions that we make here at Zipline. So whether it's kind of building a story to help guide how we price and package our products, or things like conducting market research that really help to influence our product direction. But I would also say that I haven't always been in marketing. I actually started my career as a process chemist in the pharmaceutical industry. And I would say there, obviously data is really at the center of everything that I did. And I would say that experience continues to shape how I approach my work today. But essentially, I'm always looking for the right data points to help guide smarter and faster decisions. And for the content today, we're going to dig into a few specific examples of how retailers are using data to help inform those decisions and the daily actions that they take within their stores. But before I dive in, I want to share a little bit about the lens that I use when looking at data. So throughout my career, I've seen data drive really positive outcomes. So it can point us in the right direction. It can help us de-risk decisions. It can even help predict what's about to happen. But I would say darker, sometimes even has a darker, more sinister side. And I've seen that play out in a few different ways. And sometimes it's as simple as I just drew the wrong conclusion from the data. Other times, I'd say it's more intentional. And so using data to tell a story that isn't really supported by the facts And this was published a while ago, but Malcolm Gladwell explores some really cool examples of this in his book called Outliers. I'd say if you haven't read it yet, I'd highly recommend it, especially if you love data. But I'd say there's another trap that I want to mention and talk about a little bit here, and that's the need for so much data that it really inhibits progress. And I oftentimes hear the phrase, don't let perfect get in the way of progress. And I think it especially applies here as well. And so with data, sometimes good enough is what allows you to move forward. And so it's really a balance of how much do I need to think about this data? What's going to actually inform the decision that I make and make sure that I'm driving good decisions? So as I mentioned a lifetime ago, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and I would say this industry does not always have the best reputation, but I think one thing it is known for is its deliberate pace. And I'd also argue that this intentional caution is for a really good reason. So if we don't do the homework correctly, people can lose their lives. And so every step in developing a new drug requires, rigor and time and proof that that drug is not only safe, but it ultimately is going to do more good than harm. But I'd say for us, fortunately, most of the decisions that we face in our work aren't life or death. They can affect things like operations and revenue and waste. But often what matters most is really just making that call, being ready to observe the outcome, and then allowing that space to make any adjustments and really to help your teams get back on track. And so when I think about how data should influence decisions, the first thing I consider is the potential impact of that decision. And I would say this is a bit of an oversimplification, but I imagine a spectrum. And so on one side of the spectrum, you have high stakes decisions like launching a new drug to the market or implementing a new safety procedure in a really high risk environment. And I'd say in those cases, like getting it wrong have really serious outcomes or consequences. And so in those cases, that's where rigorous data is absolutely essential. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have low stakes choices. And I have a few marketing examples. So like, which blog should I publish first? Or which email subject line should I test? If I get those decisions wrong, I'd say the downside is minimal. So maybe we might get a few less clicks or a slightly lower open rate. And in those cases also, I would say data can help us, of course, but in most of those situations, it's faster just to try it and see what happens. And so I think most of the decisions that we make, or the important ones that we make, fall into this kind of orange zone here, where data is needed, but we need to be careful that it doesn't paralyze us from actually taking action. So I want to connect this spectrum to an experiment that we ran with one of our customers. They were already using some of our core capabilities, but they weren't sure if they wanted to replace their legacy LMS with Zipline Learning. Now, thinking back to the spectrum, it wasn't a life or death situation, but I would say there were still real risks. They could waste time on an unnecessary implementation. They could spend money on the wrong technology. I'd say, or worse yet, like bigger implications, is that they could hold back some of the professional growth of the employees that are really the heartbeat of their brand. And that's, I would say, exactly the situation where data can help de-risk the decisions that we make. So we designed a simple but really powerful experiment. And so they took a group of their most engaged users and a group of their least engaged users. They split each group in half and then they recombined them. So each test group had a mix of both highly engaged and less engaged employees. And for the test, one group used Zipline Learning and the other used their legacy LMS. But everything else, I'd say the content, the comprehension checks, and the due dates, they were all held constant. And the results in this case were pretty clear. So the cohort that was using Zipline Learning saw a 20% increase in their completion and comprehension rates. And from that experiment, again, it was really easy experiment and simple. The conclusion was also easy, that investing in Zipline Learning was the right move for that organization. So I'd say that was just a simple example of how a well set up experiment can help you make better decisions. It wasn't over-engineered because it was important, but I would say no lies were on the line. So with that, I'll say, let me take a quick step back and introduce Zipline. So if you're not familiar with us, at the core, we're a platform designed to streamline operations for large distributed retailers. Our mission is to ensure that every location runs smoothly, and we do that by unifying things like communications and task management and training and store audits all into the same place. And I'd say because frontline teams begin and end their day in our platform, we also act as kind of a super app that brings external information into the platform and ensures every employee has everything that they need to be effective during their shift. And so it's not just about consolidating data, it's about getting that information to the people who can act on it. And as retailers that are managing hundreds or even thousands of locations know, success isn't only defined by larger, more strategic decisions, but it depends on kind of the countless micro decisions that make up everything that happens in the store every single day. And we understand that those smaller decisions in aggregate end up making a huge impact. And they're typically driven by access to information, so they can make those decisions with clarity and confidence. So sometimes that clarity comes from a communication or a specific task that's assigned to the store, or maybe it's a larger training initiative like rolling out a completely new product line. But I'd say many times the data that informs those decisions is not initially captured in our platform. We know that it's critical information, but the employees either don't have ready access to it, or it's not presented in a way that makes the conclusions that they need obvious. And so really the value of that data gets lost. And so that's why we continue to emphasize the notion that we need to have a single source of truth. And also know that the information must be delivered in the flow of work, especially in the retail environment. And we need to make sure that it's targeted to the right person who can act on it. So I would say to illustrate this, we can look at this Zipline dashboard here. And so again, this is where most frontline teams start in their day. And so by pulling data from other systems and presenting it in a targeted, accessible way, we're really ensuring that it only reaches the people who need it, and then that information is displayed in a way that makes their next action crystal clear. So here we're able to target information like sales performance against projections or units per transaction to the store leaders. And this is the kind of information that helps them understand the current conditions in their store and what they might need to adjust on that shift to get the team back on track. And so it might mean that they need to reinforce some upsell or cross-sell tactics with their associates, or if they see in this dashboard that they have a surge of ship from store orders, they can adjust their staffing to make sure that the back office is covered without leaving the sales floor shorthanded. And so I would say these insights don't just drive action outside of the platform. You can also manage it within Zipline. So a store manager might follow up on a task tied to a holiday promotion. Maybe it's not completed yet and they need to kind of track where that's going. Or they can do things like check completion rates or comprehension check numbers of that new training initiative, or provide some additional coaching if needed. Or we have the capability to allow store managers to send out videos to their team that really gets everybody on the same page for today's shift. So they can remind them that what their weekly goals are, or highlight the actions that they need to do to kind of get that team back on track for their goals. And for this customer in particular, their store managers are compensated on these metrics. So using this as a focal point for the discussions really gives them an opportunity to affect the outcomes that matter most to the stores and to those individuals. But I'd say the key is it's not about crunching a bunch of numbers. It's really about connecting the data that matters to the work that needs to be done and making sure that you do that in a way that fosters an environment of continuous improvement. So I'd say that's kind of how I think about data generally, but hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on ways that you can connect data with the right people to drive the right outcomes. I would say, and with that, I'm going to pass the time over to Greg to talk about how Onebeat customers are using their data.
Sure. So that's I love everything you said, because it's one of the kind of ironies of modern retail that people have more data now than they ever have had before, between CRM and all of the kind of web traffic tracking and all of that. People end up with an enormous amount of information. And what we find is that many of them are not using it to its full potential. And part of that is by necessity. If you look at the way that, people have had to deal with this pre-AI, it reminds me of the birthday paradox, which, if any of you are not familiar, is basically a question of, if you put people in a room, how many do you need before there's a 50% chance that two of them have the same birthday? Most people's intuition is, there's 365 days in a year, so 182 roughly. But the answer is 23. And the reason for that is when you start looking at um, the number of attributes that you can track, the amount of data that you have at your fingertips, the number of combinations doesn't grow linearly, it grows factorially or exponentially. So the way that we've gone to look at this is to say what AI really brings as an incremental jump is the ability for something that is not a person with an Excel spreadsheet to figure out in each individual case what combination of your data is good at predicting what your inventory should look like. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to start off from a place where there might be one store in your chain that's preternaturally inclined to have a really high affinity to something in your product database that you would never have found on your own because you can't ask somebody to look through 39 million attribute combinations. What that allows us to do is look at inventory, which is every retailer's single biggest expense, which makes sense. It's the only thing on the P&L that has a real ROI, and look at it more holistically. So when we think about what we kind of do at Onebeat is we allow the AI to really look at each individual combination of attributes and figure out for each circumstance what the correct target should be in order to maximize the ROI on the inventory. I like to make the analogy to roulette, hence the slide, which is that the way that most people approach projecting their inventory is like a traditional roulette wheel. They think about how can I come up with the likelihood that the ball is going to land on each individual number or color or something like that. And based on each one of those individual predictions, they make a decision about where they're going to place their inventory. In this case, chips or inventory. The way that AI has allowed us to move forward is one, we can look at the problem holistically. So we don't think about it in terms of what should I be betting on red 12. We think about it in terms of we have 700 chips. Where should we place them so that when we spin the wheel, we get the maximum potential outcome in terms of sales and availability and things like that. But on top of that, because we're analyzing so many combinations of attributes, it ends up meaning that we are not using an evenly weighted wheel. As anyone knows, you don't sell every product roughly equally. You sell different products at different weights. And so it allows us to look at the inventory problem in terms of how should we be arranging things in a way that's going to get us the best potential outcome. And we can do it in a way that's very accurate because we are leveraging all of the data that we're being provided from all the different sources that you guys have. The other thing that's important, Dan already talked about the importance of the data itself, but the other important thing is to think about the application of these algorithms. I was at Shop Talk a couple of weeks ago, and one of the most common conversations I had with people was, our CEOs heard about this newfangled AI. We want to be doing AI. And these algorithms and the way that you apply them, like the math isn't new. Like I went to school for math I graduated in 2007. And the underlying algorithms that go with AI ML have been around for a very long time. Like neural nets have been a thing that are well understood since the mid 90s. Most of the ML things that people are using, the algorithms that they're using, have been around since the 70s. What's important is, in addition to understanding how to, throw math at a problem, is the ability to understand how it applies in a specific use case. And so for us, we've really looked at not just from an algorithmic standpoint, but from a data preparation standpoint, what's the best way to get the data that people have and to use it for this specific application. So it's not just, everyone's AI today. I like to joke that a 10 key calculator will probably be sold as AI in the next 3 years. But it's really a way of taking the data that people have and approaching the problem holistically and not just as how do we fit AI into an old process. We can jump to the next slide. So once we have those targets and once we've taken all of the data that people have on a very specific, cross between product attributes as well as site attributes, it allows us to really look at the problem and say, we have all these different processes that we can potentially use in order to get to that arrangement. So there's the kind of traditional kind of waterfall of supply chain management, where we get things from suppliers and either drop ship them to stores, or we send them through a distribution channel like a DC or fulfillment center and get it out there. And that's obviously one path that we can take. The other thing that we also really like to look at Onebeat is the possibility of doing either rebalancing or consolidation. So a lot of times people look at inventory that's been sent from wherever they're getting their stock from, DC or supplier, and they think about it as, well, we've already ordered it, we may as well send it. We find, especially in this space with customers like Busy Beaver, is oftentimes, especially when you start taking into account order multiples, minimums, you know, truckloads, things like that, containerization, we find that a lot of times the most efficient way, the most cost-effective way to make sure that you are getting things to the correct place at the correct time is to move them store to store, and take into account all the operational constraints that people have around that, and make sure that we are taking things that are potentially overstocked in one location and moving them to another. And that's something that with Zipline we have gotten very, very good at. Algorithmically, it's a really complicated problem. But also operationally, Zipline has really allowed us to take that operational problem and make it something that can be a real source of additional profit, especially in this space. Jump to the next slide. And what we've seen just from an actual outcome standpoint is in many of our customers' cases, even those that have very high service level requirements. So the DIY space, especially as compared to things like fashion or other industries that we service, the necessity to make sure that your service levels are maintained at a consistently high level is obviously very important. But even in those cases, we've seen that we've been able to reduce the total amount of inventory people have to carry at any point in time by 25%. And that's something that's kind of a midline estimate of what we're able to do. And at the same time as we're reducing the cost of inventory by 25%, we're also improving availability by up to 95%. So the kind of end result of all of this ends up being that we are reducing the amount of inventory people have to carry, opening that up for other capital expenses or operational expenses, but at the same time improving the sales level that people have, because we are able to be more accurate because we're looking at things at such a granular level. It allows us to really understand the best use of inventory dollars and the best use of what people are doing. And oftentimes when people think about AI, they get into a space of automation. So how do we, if we're automating everything, does that mean that we can hire less people? And we really haven't seen that be the outcome. What we've seen the outcome be is that the people that are actually managing all of this are able to really kind of convert the job from something that's very tactical, very, store 10 is out of this, how do we get them more, into a place of really thinking about strategically, how do we position things? Are there stores where there's opportunity for products they're not currently carrying? Are there substitutes for products that we could be consolidating? Things of that nature. And it ends up also meaning from a store level that people are spending way less time thinking about questions like, walking the aisles and looking for gaps in the shelf inventory, and are able to do the part of the job that, from my experience, people are much more interested in, which is, helping customers, doing the kind of high value activities that are a much better use of their time than running back and forth to a stock room.
Well, Greg and Dan are going to be tough acts to follow. So, kind of think of this as the kind of cool down period after a nice workout. You're still on the treadmill, you're still technically going, just not quite as fast. So, you know, having all the data is great. I have an IT background, as my title says. I oversee our business intelligence department, but data is really only valuable unless it's actionable. So the what is great about the relationship we've been able to build with Onebeat and Zipline is that we're able to take that data and make it actionable. We've worked with various partners in the past that were able to give us great insights on what we should be doing with our inventory, but basically the game of telephone would happen. So we would have, great calls with vendors, our merchandising team would take action on that data. And then by the time we got down to the store level, we were still finding ourselves with execution issues. So somewhere along the line, the data wasn't transforming itself into on-shelf availability. And, kind of as it's been stated, Dan was talking about earlier, that the pharmaceutical industry is, life and death. Uh, but, I was around during COVID and Busy Beaver is a home improvement center. We're a hardware retailer. We were considered an essential business. So when certain items aren't in stock, it affects a lot of people. It affects the customer who ultimately has the problem. And then the associate has to sit there and tell the customer, hey, I can't solve your problem. And sometimes that's a very difficult thing to do. And sometimes I like to put my, self in the shoes of the retail employee, the frontline employee that has to, deal with the customers day in and day out. So when we're able to take the data that we get from great partners like Onebeat and actually execute it into in store, it makes it much smoother for everyone. Can we go to the next slide here? So again, I've talked about working with various partners. We still have vendors that we work with today. Some supply us, some are more of a consultancy basis, but they provide us that data and then it kind of stops, at our headquarters and doesn't, work to getting to the stores. And where I've seen retailers be successful is when they have a large development team, they have a custom point of sale, and they're able to dial it in and be able to make the system do whatever they want it to do. Well, unfortunately, that's not the situation at Busy Beaver. We have a great point of sale system, but it is very limited in its integrations and its ability to do customizations. I don't have, a very big team. So with partners like Onebeat and Zipline, they were actually able to work together without my involvement to work on the integration that I'm going to talk about. So if we can go to the next slide. So Onebeat has an amazing dashboard. They have an amazing interface where we're able to get all sorts of data insights. And the one that I'm going to talk about is the one that's kind of been most impactful for us. That was store-to-store transfers. So we have 19 locations and we're trying to transfer data from store to store. So previously what we've had to do in other systems is basically get that information, compile it down into a spreadsheet, send an email to the store, and hope that they execute on it. A lot of times we would see back and forth, we didn't get an opportunity to follow up with the store. But today we have a direct integration between Onebeat and Zipline. So whenever our inventory manager approves a transfer, she basically processes it in Onebeat. That then sends a workflow from Onebeat to Zipline, where the store basically gets a picking list requiring them to pull the product into a transfer in our point of sale system and then mark it ready for complete. They have 48 hours to execute that. It's an interface, everyone in our stores is getting in Zipline every day. It's part of their daily process. And then our headquarters is basically able to go in there and see that the transfers are completed. So no more is a transfer truck showing up to a store for the transfer not to be pulled. It makes the process so much easier for us and make sure that the execution gets done. And like I said, the two partners were able to work together and set up a demo environment and do it all without, me having to be involved in it every single moment of it. So it's been a great partnership.
And I just want to underscore the importance of, getting the right information to the right people, which kind of dovetails onto your story, Adam, which is like I've seen processes before where it's like, oh, I get the data to my teams, and the way they get it to their teams is they send a spreadsheet that has 1,000 lines on it. And each individual store has to go through and find line 999 out of 1,000 that's actually related to them. And so being able to pick apart that data and send the right information to the right people just really helps to streamline the process and make sure that everybody's on the right page.
And for us, a big benefit of this has also been, in cases where we don't have a tool, an intermediary like Zipline, who's communicating to the stores what they need to be able to do. We send the task, but we have to kind of do our own validation to figure out if they've done it. I worked in a store and we got all kinds of tasks from our home office that maybe we did them, maybe we didn't, but it was something where there wasn't the direct feedback line that could tell us, no, this happened on this date. And so the speed to, continuing to manage inventory, knowing through Zipline that it's been executed, it has been uh, kind of made the accuracy significantly better for us as well.
I love that, Greg. And I think, I oftentimes chat with customers and talk about their broken old processes, right? And, just thinking about sending tasks or things that need to be done to your teams or red or whatever, and not having that visibility into who's done what is so anxiety provoking for me as an individual and how I like to work through processes. But it really, like, you think about, okay, you send all the things that need to be done to your stores. And then how do you follow up on that when things that are out there that need to be done? Do I need to send an email to all of my stores and ask individually, like, have you done these things? Reply to this, which is super cumbersome. Or do you reach out to the individuals and say, did you do this thing? It's really a lot of that follow-up action that really bogs down teams and, paralyzes you into, did the thing get done? When really you should be focused on, how do I do the task in the way that needs to be done most effectively in my store? Awesome. So I think that is most of the content that we had prepared for today. Hopefully you got a pretty brief introduction to kind of what Zipline does, as well as Onebeat, and how Busy Beaver is kind of that customer that we're helping to kind of bring that data and get it into the hands of the people who need it. Luckily, we had a couple questions that were submitted before this webinar, and I just want to kind of round robin this to the team. But the first question is, what are the 5 non-negotiable store KPIs beyond sales and gross profit that actually predict execution quality week to week? It doesn't have to be 5, but Adam, I'd love to know kind of what things are you looking at on a daily basis to know that you're being effective?
Well, one of the things that I always, when I'm talking this store that, I want to make sure they're on top of is their negative on hands. And, you know, uh, if there are native on hands, there's something wrong somewhere. There's some sort of miscommunication. So I typically, when a store has, a blank list of negative on hands, they're typically keeping their procedures tight and clean. Similarly to that, if we see a store's out of stock percentage go, it typically is showing that some level of execution is not getting done. Like you, Dan, I also, dabble with marketing. And one of the things that we do is we have bi-weekly ads, and part of that is a sign package. And if that sign package is, not, if people aren't being compliant, making sure they get the signage up, you typically see a direct result between that and the store's actual sales. Um, you know, with Zipline, we're lucky to have this great platform where basically we can actually track execution. Execution and readership are huge for us as a Zipline organization. But if you aren't a Zipline organization, if you have some sort of, whether it's a paper checklist, if someone's not taking the time to do those, simple asks, then they're probably, not, paying attention to the details of other things that need to be done. Um, Another thing, customer experience metrics. So we have mystery shop scores. Our target, is 100%, but anytime a store is below 85, that typically sounds an alarm bell for us. Typically under 85%, they're not eligible for their bonuses. So if you see those customer metrics go down, whether you're using a mystery shop program, whether you have NPS scores, or whether you're just monitoring, social media or Google reviews, if the customer experience is not good, it's going to, line up almost directly with sales. So, I don't know how many metrics that was. I think it was at least five. But those are things I'm kind of passionate about, my years being in retail.
Awesome. And I love that you bring up execution. That's obviously something that's really important to us and our customers here at Zipline. And I think to kind of underscore the importance of that, I think about, peak performance events, right? So the time leading up to holidays, where you have a couple weeks where the promotions and your floor sets are really important. So is everything set up correctly? Are the displays set up? Has the pricing changed to reflect the new promo pricing? Is that new product on the shelf like it should be? And research has shown that if you don't execute those things until, when it gets closer and closer to that event, you're actually missing out on key revenue that your business could be bringing in just because you haven't done it on time or you haven't executed it effectively. And really what execution helps you do is to pinpoint the stores that are behind on those tasks and the things that need to be done. Not to say that you're wrong for not getting them done on day one, but you can reach back out to the store and say, what's the barrier here that I can help you solve? Is it that you didn't get the signage on time? Is your team not trained? And so it helps you really troubleshoot with each of those locations to make sure that everybody can get on track as quickly as possible. So you can really maximize what you're doing throughout that promotional event. Greg, I'd love to send it over to you to talk about what your customers are using.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a question came in that was examples of where data in the flow of work has saved time or prevented errors in retail operations. And this is one of the examples that I can think about, which is one of the really big benefits of having a very accurate view of what your ideal inventory position should look like is the quantification. I've sat through easily hundreds and hundreds of promo calendar meetings where people will go back and forth about, what in the case of the business I was in, what she wants, what she's going to do, all of that. And when you're looking at starting from a position of an ideal inventory position, it just really helps quantify exactly what your decision should look like. So it takes it from a place of kind of speculation to a place of exactly what should we be doing. So one of the things that we do is when you start looking at things like you're talking about events or seasonal changes or things like that, what is the kind of expected change? One of the things that we see in the DIY space is end caps. So like if you move anything to an end cap, its sales are going to pick up. But it's important to understand not just whether or not sales are going to pick up, but also have they picked up by the amount that they should given the sacrifice of real estate that you're using. And understanding that a typical increase from an end cap move is, I'm going to make up numbers, but 400%. If you move something there and it increases only 200%, you understand that that's probably not the best use of real estate for the product that you're looking at. Another piece of that is timing. A lot of the question of what you should be doing with inventory movement comes down to timing. If you've got multiple suppliers and you also have this concept of store transfers and you're looking at how do we do our best job to keep this product in stock at this store, having something that allows you to know what's going on in real time or close to real time really allows you to figure out what's the best combination of sourcing options that you have that allow you not to either double dip or otherwise make errors in your execution.
Awesome. I love that answer, Greg. Another question that we got was, how do you separate noise tasks from impact tasks so teams don't drown in checklists? And I feel like I can tackle this one. So there's a few different things with how we think about work within Zipline. And one is I kind of mentioned before, like managing 5 different checklists and 5 different applications is really difficult. So am I going to priority 1 on checklist 1 or priority 3 on checklist 2? And so really consolidating all that information into one place just automatically helps you prioritize everything that needs to be done that day. But we also help folks with creating signals within the application to say, or tags that say, hey, this should be priority 1 for today. If nothing else gets done in the store because you're busy, you got to focus on this task because it's really important for us to execute on the strategy that we have. And so just being able to prioritize the things within the application. And then I would say, lastly, we kind of give some independence to store teams to make adjustments on the fly, right? So if you are the store manager, given the ability for them to kind of go in and say, hey team, we got a really busy day in front of us. It looks like we have 2 priority 1 tasks that HQ feels like need to be done today. However, the Super Bowl is happening right down the street this week. And so we know that foot traffic's going to be crazy. We're just going to have a hard time keeping up with that. So love that we have these priorities, but there's something that's happening in our region that makes us unique that we need to be able to make those adjustments to that maybe HQ doesn't have that much insight into. And so being able to provide that flexibility for folks to really prioritize what needs to be done within that checklist using the application, but also give, kind of empowering the store leaders to come in and call an audible and say like, hey, I know that this stuff needs to get done, but this is the reality of what's happening in the stores today. And so we need to be able to adjust. Okay, I said budget 40 to 45 minutes, but I have one more question that came in. I want to make sure that we all have a time to answer because I think it's interesting. So the question is, you've seen firsthand how technology can reshape day-to-day operations. So looking ahead to 2026, where do you see retail evolving, especially in terms of how stores run, how teams work, and how customers expect to be served? And Adam or Greg, I'll let you jump in to kind of answer that one.
Well, this thing right here. So, I think if you go back to, 10 years ago, we were telling associates you need to lock this in your locker and get it when you're done with your shift. Um, and that's just not the reality today. People live and die by their phone, their smart device. And, how many times have you been, just sitting around conversating with someone and, you ask, hey, who won this Super Bowl? You type it, you look it up, you have the answer. So, from my experience and some of the technologies that we're exploring, our customers like that our associates have devices where they're able to get the information that they need. So, you go around Target, you hear all those kind of car alarm sounds because everyone there has multiple devices. It's just getting the data into the employee's hand so that they can answer questions, have the right information. So I think you're going to see more of that. It's more, I think a couple years ago, we were looking for the touchless self-checkout, walk in, walk out. Certain industries, there probably is a desire for that. But for our industry, DIY, they want to come in, they want to have that human touch, they want to talk with somebody. So we're augmenting our employees to kind of, give them that extra advantage. So I think you're going to see more and more retailers have different technologies from, smart headsets to allowing you employees to use their personal phones or corporate devices that have, important data on them.
Awesome. And I was going to let you go first, Greg, but I'm going to jump in because I want to piggyback on what Adam said here. But yeah, it's really interesting when I think about the last couple of years, and I kind of just looked this up, but in January 2023, ChatGPT reached 100 million users. And so this is like 2 years ago, right? And when I think about the way my job worked 2 years ago versus today, there's just no way that I would have predicted what kind of a seismic shift would have happened within my own career. And so like that's just a way for me to say like who knows what's going to happen in the future. However, I do think we can look at the recent past, right? So you talked about having access to mobile devices, and we think about just being able to use Google to search pretty much anything has really changed how folks shop in brick and mortar locations. Oftentimes they do research before they get to the location that informs the things that they're going to purchase once they get there. Or they show up at a location and they look for alternatives for the things that they're looking at on shelves. Or is there a place that is selling this for cheaper? Or is the inventory located in a different location? All that I would say is influenced just by availability of search and changing patterns and behavior. And I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. Not to say that we're going to walk into a store and there's going to be a kiosk where we have an avatar that's talking to us that is helping us. But I do think that there's going to be AI-enabled shopping when you go into a store. So not just saying, I want to buy the red shoes, or like in your case, Adam, I need boards to build a deck and I need nails to do it. Maybe you go in and say, I'm trying to build this outdoor experience at my home, and either having AI available to you to help build out that vision for what you want to do, or have an associate that's enabled with like some questions that can help you work through that experience to say, I've got this idea in my head of how things should shake out. However, AI's got a lot more data and has done this a million times before. Check out these 3 ways that you could think about getting it done. And I think that's really going to influence how people shop in the future.
Yeah, I think more globally, the amount of friction that people are willing to endure to accomplish tasks is getting like trivially low. Like, you talk about building a deck. I think that we're quickly moving to a place where the expectation is I can upload an image of a chicken coop I want to build. I would like to know what materials I need, and I would like to know what aisle they're in, and I expect that inventory to be present. Like that's it. We're heading towards a place where the people who can reduce the amount of friction that people need to endure to do any task at all is getting almost to closer and closer to zero, like asymptotically to zero. And I think that that's something that in the retail space is coming. I don't know about 2026, but by 2030, I think that the expectation is going to be that I just need to tell some application what I want to accomplish, and I want it to tell me how to accomplish that. And they are going to want the back end of the retail point of sale to be able to predict or accommodate that. Like we're talking, I mean, 5 years ago, it was considered borderline revolutionary to be able to walk into a store and have them 2 days ship something to you. Now it's like gotten even to the point where just not having it in the store is enough to undermine their confidence in your ability to provide what they're looking for. So that's like largely what it is. People are expecting that the systems that back end the experience that they're going through has figured out the logistics for them in a way that is kind of wild to think about even from not that long ago.
I think that's the end of our time today. I really appreciate you joining us. Like I said, we're going to share this presentation afterwards. Thank you, Greg and Adam, for joining me on the panel. I think it's been a really fun conversation. I get to hear the word asymptote, which is super exciting, that I don't hear in most presentations. But I appreciate you joining us today. So thank you so much.
And Greg likes to brag about liking retail math.
I love retail math more than I love some of my relatives.
Awesome. Thank you so much.